Have you ever walked into a classroom and seen a bilingual or multilingual student reading in one language, talking to a friend in another, and then write English? And maybe you've wondered, well, should they actually really be doing that? And even more importantly, is that helping them learn or slowing them down? Well, today I want to talk about translanguaging because I genuinely believe it's one of the most important and misunderstood ideas in education, and it's one of the most powerful. So, first of all, what is translanguaging? Well, for years, educators acted as if bilingual and multilingual students had separate language systems in their heads. It's as if they had an English box and an Arabic box and a Spanish box. But brain imaging tells us a different story. It's when they use their languages, we see largely the same language networks lighting up. And it suggests that multilingual people actually have one integrated language repertoire, a single toolbox filled with different linguistic tools. Depending on the task or the audience or the context, they simply choose the tools that help them to communicate and learn most effectively. Now, that's not proof of translanguaging by itself. Brain scans don't prove educational theories, but neuroscience does fit much better with the idea of an integrated linguistic repertoire rather than the old notion of completely separate language systems. And if you think about it, if you're fixing something at home, and you don't decide beforehand that you're just going to use a screwdriver, you use whatever tool is helpful to get the job done. And languages work the same way. Multilinguals naturally draw on all of their linguistic resources to make meaning, to solve problems, and to communicate. Now, here's where things become important because many schools still operate from the English only mindset. The assumption is that the fastest way to learn English is to use English all the time. But again, the research behind translanguaging suggests that students don't need to abandon their home language in order to develop English. In fact, maintaining and using home language actually supports and accelerates their academic development and their multilingual growth. And honestly, that's what families want. Families don't send their children to school hoping that they'll lose their first language. They want their children to become multilingual. They want them to gain English whilst keeping their language and their culture and their identity and their family connections that comes with their home language. Now, another thing that's really important is that literacy transfers. When students learn how to organize their ideas or make inferences or summarize information or sustain attention while reading or structure their writing in one language, many of those skills transfer over into another language. They're not starting from zero every time they learn a new language. If you think about it, it's like driving a car. You may learn to drive a car driving on one side with a steering wheel and then move to a country where the steering wheel's on the other side. You don't relearn to drive a car. You know all of those basic skills. You just hop in and off you go and adjust. And I think that's where sometimes teachers underestimate this strength that they carry with them, or bilingual and multilinguals, into the classroom. A student may not yet have the English vocabulary to show their knowing, to show what they know. And I think that's something that teachers sometimes underestimate. A student may not yet have enough English vocabulary to show what they know, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't have the thinking skills. The thinking is often already there. The language just simply has to catch up. This actually reminds me of something from my own experience as a student in a bilingual school. And I remember one particular lesson where we were working on a problem-solving task in the French-speaking classroom with a French-speaking teacher. And I completely understood the task and I knew exactly how to solve it and what to do. And in fact, I worked through the problem with a friend, and between us we actually used 2 or 3 different languages as we discussed the ideas, tested the solutions and figured out the answer. The thinking wasn't the problem. We successfully solved it. The challenge came when the teacher wanted us to explain our reasoning and do it only in French. And I remember struggling to find the precise words quickly enough to express what I wanted to say. Before I could fully explain my thinking, the teacher had moved on rather despairingly, assuming that I hadn't really understood. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, you can force me to speak in one language in this classroom, but thankfully you can't stop me thinking in any language that I want. And looking back, that experience really captures why translanguaging matters. My ability to demonstrate my understanding was actually limited by my French. but my ability to think and to reason and to collaborate and to solve was not. So now, one of my favourite ideas about translanguaging is that it moves students from this can't to a can. Think about it. If a student is studying like photosynthesis in English, and if the English text is too difficult, are they actually incapable of learning photosynthesis? Well, of course not. You just give them a video in their home language, or you give them some text in their home language, or you let them discuss the concepts and the vocabulary through with a classmate in their home language first. And suddenly, they understand the science. They know that they can participate in the lesson, and participation really matters. Students learn through engagement, right? And when they understand what's happening, they're more likely to contribute, to ask questions, and then to interact with the content. The goal isn't to replace English. The goal is to use every available resource to support their learning as they acquire English. And here's something that doesn't really get talked about enough, and that is that translanguaging is also about equity. When we tell students that only one language is welcome in the classroom, we're sending them a message about which languages, and by extension thereof, which cultures and identities are actually valued in our classrooms and in our school. But when we create a space for students to use their full linguistic repertoires, we're creating and communicating that their experiences and their cultures, their languages and their identities truly matter. So how can teachers actually do translanguaging in practice? Well, the good news is that you don't even have to be a multilingual yourself. You don't have to speak the languages that your students speak in the classroom. That's one of the biggest myths out there. What you can do is you can encourage your students to compare concepts across languages. You can provide key vocabulary translations, allow students to discuss ideas in their home languages first, display students' work in multiple languages in your classroom, encourage the use of home language books and texts and videos, and allow students to draft and to brainstorm in their strongest languages before producing their work in English. These are simple shifts, but they can completely change how included and successful multilingual learners feel in the classroom. Now, ultimately, translanguaging isn't really about language, it's about mindset. Do we focus on what multilingual students can't do in English yet, or do we focus on everything that they can do while we allow them to use their full linguistic toolkit? And for me, the answer is obvious. When we embrace translanguaging, we stop seeing students through a deficit lens and start recognizing their incredible assets that they bring into our classrooms every day.